Jazzcast Pros.
Have you ever had a boss and you worked for them for a little while and you said, I know exactly the type of boss I don't want to be? Have you ever, maybe as a child, you said, this is the exact opposite of the parent I want to be? Maybe you went through a friendship and said, this is the type of friend I don't want to be. We are going to take that and funnel it through our entrepreneur eyes today. I'm creating a series on the downfall of blank. And today is episode 1, and I thought it'd be fun to start with my hometown of Rochester, New York. And so today we're going to dive into the downfall of Kodak and what we can learn from that as entrepreneurs. Welcome to High Vibe Table Talks, the podcast to help you, the current or aspiring solopreneur, navigate the messy middle so you can make both an income and an impact. Hi, I'm Rashawn, and I love creating safe spaces for women to be courageous in their dreams. This is going to be episode 102. I just hit 100 episodes. So if you haven't listened to that episode, go ahead and check that out. I actually went live with my podcast producer, Jazzy, and it was so fun. We had an awesome conversation. But I was meeting with another podcaster a couple weeks ago, and we were just kind of like brainstorming and talking about like our business and stuff. And one thing that he was kind of talking to me about was like really honing in on like the Rochester entrepreneur kind of network. I had this idea as we were talking of using inspiration from big businesses that failed and how can we learn from their mistakes as entrepreneurs. And to kind of connect Rochester to that idea, the first idea I came up with was with Kodak. So if you are not familiar with Kodak, we will get into that today, but it did start in Rochester. It was a huge Rochester-based business. And actually, I didn't realize it was founded in 1888. But like when I was growing up in elementary, middle school, you knew a ton of people who worked for Kodak. There were Kodak plants all over Rochester. Like it was a really big deal and really like the lifeblood of Rochester. And now that those complexes are very vacant. And so it's just kind of crazy. And so I was just thinking through, what mistakes did Kodak make and how can we learn from that? First, I'll give you a little bit of background on Kodak. I was talking about it on my co-working call last week. And I was like, does everybody know what Kodak is? And they were like, it's the picture people, kind of. And so, yes, Kodak was founded in 1888 by George Eastman. And so again, if you go to Rochester, there's the Eastman house, like Eastman is everywhere, Kodak, and if you go downtown, there's huge houses and a lot of that money was Kodak money. And so they dominated the film and photography industry for a long time. By the 1990s, Kodak controlled 90% of the film market in the US. So that was really when they were at the top of their game. And if you think about it now, everybody has a camera in their pocket. They carry them with them all the time. And so how did Kodak miss the jump from film to digital and that sort of technology? And what's kind of crazy is that there was an engineer who worked for Kodak named Steve Sasson, and he, in 1975, actually invented the digital camera. And so it's interesting that they had this opportunity to really go to the next level and invent what was next. And they just never took that leap. They put it on the shelf and really kind of doubled down. They said, this is what's making us money. Why would we invent something that's going to take profit away from the part of our business that is making us billions of dollars? Unfortunately, that was the wrong move to make. So at one point I'm just pulling up the statistics that I looked at during my research. In 1988, Kodak employees amounted to 145,300 employees globally that Kodak had. In 2004, Kodak's local job count hit 16,300, falling below 20,000 for the first time in decades. So 1988, there were over 145,000 people employed by Kodak. And in 2004, it fell below 20,000. It was 16,300. Like, that's a huge drop off. They had to, I think it was 2012, they had to declare bankruptcy. And so, like, why did the company that invented this new piece of technology that really did align with their business well not take advantage of it? And that ultimately led to their demise. In 2009, the company posted $137 million fourth quarter loss and announced plans to cut up to 4,500 more jobs. So another quarter of their jobs were just going to be gone. And it stopped selling Kodak Chrome film after 74 years of production. Really, in the early 2000s, that's when digital cameras, and I was that person. I was the one, always had my camera around. I was always developing film, like in high school, but throughout the 2000s, Kodak sales really declined, and they attempted to pivot, but by that point, it was too late. They invented this piece of technology, put it on the shelf, and others surpassed them very quickly. You know, it was a rough time in Rochester. There was a lot of unemployment. People who had hitched their wagon to Kodak and said, I'm going to work here until I retire, lost everything. I mean, they lost their retirement. They had no jobs. There were so many people that were like less than 10 years away from retirement that had to go back and find something else. And there wasn't a lot in Rochester to do. There were a lot of people who had to go to Buffalo, go to Syracuse to find jobs, get paid a lot less because of, I mean, just think about the fact that they went from 140,000 jobs to 16,000. That's a lot. 125,000 people that at one point were working for Kodak and then no longer had a job. Obviously, that didn't happen overnight, but it's not like it was less than 20 years and you lost that amount of your workforce. So how do we take lessons from that downfall into our business as entrepreneurs? And one of the things that I like to talk about with entrepreneurship is the pivot. You know, I have quite a few episodes on it. It's a really important thing that we have to get comfortable with in business because as entrepreneurs, like I'm in my Thomas Edison era. I say that all the time because I'm finding all the ways that it doesn't work before I find the way that it does. So as you're going through those different parts of business, you're going to find things that fail, things that don't work. And so it's a fine line with pivoting because, you know, sometimes you have to like make sure that you're showing up consistently and for long enough. Like I talk about this with cold calling. Don't cold call two people and then give up because you say it doesn't work. Like you have to really give it a shot. But you have to really look inward. And I put my mastermind down. I said, you know, I really feel called to do this sales prospecting course. So how can I have to put that down for this to be successful. And it was a lot of inner work that I did to make sure that it was the right thing. That for me, again, is a lot easier. With pivoting, you know, you're in a speedboat, whereas Kodak is trying to reverse the Titanic. So it's not to say that like totally switching the business is something that can happen overnight, especially for a company like Kodak. But that is an advantage that entrepreneurs have over businesses like Kodak. With 145,000 global employees, you can't just all of a sudden go, I'm going to shut these plants down that are producing film and I'm only going to focus on digital cameras. But as a solopreneur and it's just my business, and I think this is my next golden ticket. This produced for me very well for a very long time. Now I'm switching to this. Like that's a lot easier for us to do. And the other lesson that I think as entrepreneurs we can take from it, you know, like my mastermind was amazing. I loved it so much. I know that I will come back to it. There are certain things that are meant to be there for a season in your life, and you're not always meant to hold on to that. Like just because something was successful, made you a lot of money, you enjoyed doing it, like, and when you pivot, that doesn't mean that that was a failure, that wasn't worth it, it was a waste of your time, or you're putting any sort of like negative connotation on that piece or that season in your life. maybe it's just time for your next season. When I shut the garden down for the winter, I'm forced to do it because of the cold weather. But like me shutting it down and then kind of like hibernating doesn't have any negative connotation on the abundance that was my summer garden. It's just on to the next season. Like I can't really do afternoon activities right now. And so things that really filled my cup in the afternoons previously, I have to set those down right now because there is something that is more important on my time. And so as a business owner, we get very connected to these things that we create. I had this amazing course. I had this wonderful group. I had, X, Y, and Z, and it made me a lot of money. I'm not a fraud. I wasn't wrongly selling this thing because I'm pivoting away from it, because I'm closing it to move on to the next chapter. That is business. That is us pivoting. That is us growing. That is us finding our next season. I've said this many times on the podcast, like when I got shut down that community, I laid on the kitchen floor and like cried because like I had put so much time into it and it wasn't like super successful. It wasn't like bringing in a ton of money, but I put a lot of time and effort into it. And also, if I wasn't selling that, what was I selling? Like I didn't have a next offer, but I had to put that down to create space in my heart and my brain and my schedule so I could find what is next. So use being a speedboat to your advantage. The next thing that I would offer up is that don't get super focused on the what, like what you're selling, what your offer is, because as entrepreneurs, we're very creative. And so we're always coming up with ideas. It can feel like, well, I have all these different tangents and I'm so discombobulated in my offer. And I do think that it is important to, especially in the beginning, hone in. I didn't think I was going to be successful in selling my sales course if I was also selling my mastermind and my podcast. And, so like, I'm like, okay, I have to go in and this is how I'm going to be the most impactful is by selling the sales course. But at the heart of it, I like to think about high vibe is, or not even high vibe, because my business may outgrow that, may change, may pivot from that as a name. But like who I am as an entrepreneur is like a wheel. And so the hubcap is me and who I am and my brand and my heart and my alignment. And this spoke was accountability groups for a while. And this spoke was masterminds for a while. And right now the spoke is sales prospecting course. And another spoke is this podcast. And so I was talking with Robbie, who's actually my first podcast guest. I remember her and I having this conversation, and it's not the what, it's the what of the what of the what. And so really drilling down into like why you're offering what you are offering. And so that if there is a pivot, if there is a change, Kodak was big into like the memories. And that felt like film for a long time. And it was film for a long time. And then the memories are going to be captured digitally. Then the memories were going to be captured on a phone. And so like imagine if instead of an iPhone, I was holding a Kodak phone. That could have been them. They could have transitioned from film to digital to phones because that's just how the world was going. And the heart of what they would have been doing would have been the same. Like I love sitting down at night and like my husband and I are watching TV and we have this digital photo frame and it just scrolls through, hundreds of pictures. And I look at it and it makes me smile. And sometimes it makes me sad because like, how is my daughter so big? But then I go into like Amazon photos and go to like this day 5 years ago and I download more of those photos and put them onto the frame. It's like this nice little nightly routine that I have. Anywho, just because those memories aren't on film doesn't mean that they're any less of memories. I don't know if that makes sense, but really sinking into what Kodak had to offer was memories and capturing them and remembering the moments that you want to take with you go forward. And they were so stuck on, this is my product, this is what I have to offer, that they couldn't see how that was going to transpire into something else in the future. So when you are thinking about pivoting, when you are thinking about changing, when you are thinking about doing something different, and even if you're not, like, think about the core of your offer, not necessarily what it looks like at the moment, because that will really help you. Thinking back to when I did put down my mastermind, part of why I did is because there were a lot of women who came to me and said, I really would love what you have to offer. My cash flow isn't in a space where I can afford to participate in a mastermind at the moment. And so then eventually it started to click where I was like, I need to show women entrepreneurs how they can start to make more money so they can then go invest in themselves in things like masterminds. And so it's not that the heart of my business really changed, because I'm about like community and building your business, making an income and an impact. The heart of that didn't change. It has a different iteration at the moment because I realized the needs of my ideal client was different than what I had to offer. So the heart of it is still the same. It's just the offering at the moment, the iteration, the season I'm in right now is different. 2 more points, and they're going to be a little bit shorter, but the first point is fail forward. You don't have to pivot perfectly. You don't have to know exactly how it's going to look, but don't get stuck using failure as a way to like spin into a shame cycle. But fail forward and use it as lessons, use it as momentum, use it as, well, I'm not going to do that, or like, this just didn't work out. And so I'm that much closer to the way that it is going to work out. And the second piece is don't let your ego get in the way. I think that women deal with this less than men, which could be a reason why, white collar corporate Kodak failed in the way that it did. But we connect a lot of our business to our identity as human beings, and this isn't just for entrepreneurs. Like, there's a lot of people who what they do for work is their entire identity. And when they move into a new role or maybe retire or get laid off, I know I dealt with this when I got laid off. It was like a huge ego check. But entrepreneurs, we create this thing, and it feels like it's our baby and it's our everything, and it is a piece of us. And so when you have to pivot, when you have to transition, it can feel like I'm a failure. I was wrong. I did something poorly, which is why I have to do this. And it's not about that. Another one of my previous mastermind participants pops in my head, Amelia, because I remember when she was talking about data over drama. Like, she put all her data into the CRM. And I talk about this in the sales prospecting course, because when you find that like the 20% that leads to 80% of your outcomes, like, that's the data that you want. And so part of entrepreneurship is following your gut and knowing what feels right. But part of it is, hey, the data is showing me that this isn't working. And so I need to pivot. And that can be an ego check. I've seen a lot of threads lately talking about how they didn't realize that entrepreneurship was such a self-growth journey and a personal growth journey, and how much inner work you have to do as an entrepreneur. And I will for sure attest to that. You really have to let go of your ego. That's definitely something that needs to happen. And so, yeah, that was a fun deep dive. I hope that there's a lesson that you learned from Kodak, or maybe, some fun facts about Kodak that you didn't know. I have a few more. This is going to be, I think, a 5-part series, unless more, because another one popped in. It was going to be a 4-part series. And then today I was like doing something and I was like, oh, what about WeWork? Because that was such an interesting, I was thinking about starting an in-person co-working space when WeWork really started to explode. And so it was just a really interesting case study on over-evaluation. Anyways, we'll get into that in that episode. But I think it's going to be a 5-part series on big businesses that failed and what we can learn from them. But I thought it'd be really cool to start out the series with Kodak since its birthplace was Rochester, where I am located. And I hope you took something away from it. And remember, you are a speedboat, not the Titanic. And also remember that big dreams and small steps can transform your life.